there's so much work involved. You have to love them. So again, pick an enterprise you're going to enjoy. Life is short. Do you love them? Time and again, I see the most successful livestock people seem to be the ones who have a deep, genuine caring for these animals. Because you care for them, you notice sooner if there's a problem with them, if somebody's sick, unhappy, whatever. And think about, too, are you willing to be responsible for them 24/7, 365? One of the great things about market gardening is generally you're off in the winter, or at least you can do indoor, clean, quiet work. Animals, every single day. They have to be fed, and I'm saying this like it's grueling. It's not. If you love animals, it's fun. It gets you outside. But they have to be cared for every day. If the 24/7 is doable, but maybe the 365 isn't. Maybe you want to be off in the summers, for example, or off in the winters. You could consider, rather than raising animals and breeding and having babies, maybe you could go with stockers. A stocker being, say with a cattle, you buy a weaned steer, put them on your grass over the summer, and sell them in the fall. Then boom, they're gone. Then you're free to do other things in the winter. Of course, you're going to make a little less money, but then the effort and expenditures of keeping the mother cow and bull might offset that. I personally made the decision that I don't want to keep mother cows and I don't want bulls. I just buy stockers. That works for me. Do you enjoy being outside? Of course. You have to ask yourself these questions. Do you like getting dirty? It's hard work. The rewards are great, but you work hard for it. I also suggest start out small. If it's a species you really don't know anything about, just get a couple. Live with them for 6 months or a year and see if you even like them. Because it will be a disaster if you don't like these animals. You want to like them. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the major livestock species that most people raise. Trying to get to the next slide here. Which are rabbits, poultry, goats, sheep, cattle, and pigs. And then I'm going to briefly touch on what I call exotics at the end of my presentation. Sorry guys, techno problems. I can't seem to get the slides to advance. Colette? Okay, first I'm going to briefly touch on rabbits. Not a lot of people are raising rabbits, but it's something that's very easy and quite inexpensive to get into. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons. Housing and land needs are just minimal, of course. They live in cages, in your barn, in an unused portion of your barn. That would be simple. They have a very high reproductive rate. They breed like rabbits. Meat rabbits have a very fast turnaround. They're ready to at market weight 3 or 4 pounds. And there's also a fairly high demand for pets. The cons are the negatives. If you're thinking of fiber rabbits, and this is not a negative at all. By the way, these are 2 photos of Angora rabbits. It's not a downside, but if you want to sell fiber from any animal, you need to understand the fiber. You need to understand how to work with it so you can speak to your customers, so your customers know that you know what you're doing and what you're talking about. So if you're interested in fibers, this could be a great entry-level enterprise or a great complementary enterprise. If you want to raise meat rabbits, again, there does not seem to be a huge market for it. I think you can just kind of look at your grocery store meat market area and get an idea of, it's pretty obvious, what animals sell well, what don't. It's kind of hard to find rabbit meat in the grocery store. There does not seem to be much of a demand for it. And you're going to need to do your own processing. I think that's a given. Very few people process rabbits, and certainly not in a certified facility, which you'd have to have if you want to sell it to in a grocery store. So think about doing your own processing if you can manage it. And again, also finding a steady market. It can be challenging. It's not impossible, but it'll be a marketing task for you. Okay, next slide. Then I want to talk quite a little more about poultry. That's a very popular enterprise. It's a wonderful starter enterprise. Again, it's easy and even less expensive to get into than rabbits. Very quick turnaround. For chickens, you can 8 to 10 weeks, they're ready to harvest. Turkeys, 24 weeks, okay, but that's still only a summer. That's pretty fast. Minimal land, even if you're pasturing them, an acre could house many, many, many birds rotated through the pasture. Housing can be minimal. They're just not picky. I'm sure you've all seen some of the hilarious homes that chickens live in, cobbled together. Basically, they just need to be dry and out of the wind. A lot of people, chicken manure makes dramatic leaps in soil quality, and a lot of people have pastured poultry to complement their crop enterprises to boost the soil fertility. Or maybe they bought a crummy piece of land which they eventually want to turn into crops, but they'll put broilers on it for a few years and improve the soil so dramatically. Rather than purchasing inputs, pouring it onto the soil, the chickens are doing it for you, and then you're selling them. Just makes sense. A lot of people are also using flocks of birds to follow grazing species because they definitely help with parasite control. And with cattle, being incessant scratchers, looking for bugs, they'll spread apart the cow patties, which helps spread the fertilizer over your field, break them up. Horse patties too, but to a lesser degree because they're more clumps, they're not patties. Pasture can provide up to 30% of the bird's feed. That could be a significant help in your feed bill. And also, of course, almost everybody eats either eggs or birds. It's going to be pretty easy to find customers. In fact, there seems to be a huge demand for it. It's a great complementary enterprise as well as a starter enterprise. The reason why I always recommend it as a starter enterprise is it's a wonderful way to learn direct marketing. You learn very quickly the whole concept of taking orders in advance so you know how many you're going to be able to sell. Taking deposits because that's a commitment from the customer and you know you actually are going to sell them. That's a wonderfully satisfying, comforting feeling. And those deposits help with your cash flow. They help you pay for the chicks, pay for the feed. You learn how to deal with your customers. Presentation is important. It gives you good experience with that. And again, you've spent very little money to get into it. Next slide, Colette. That's the pros. Now, of course, there are cons to everything. Meat birds. The meat birds are, especially broiler chickens, are fairly delicate and they need daily attention. They have high daily labor requirements, but it's for a short period of time, each batch, 8 to 10 weeks, and they're gone. If that's a problem for you or it doesn't work with your other enterprises, maybe you want to consider egg layers. They don't need nearly as much daily attention, but it's year-round. So, it's a balance. And I'm repeating, they can only get about 30% of their feed from pasture because what that means is you're buying the other 70% of the feed. And as Cindy mentioned, feed costs have risen dramatically in the last 20 years, so that's something to think about. There are people, like there's a gentleman in our area, in the Moscow area, who raises and direct markets about 800 broilers a year, but he's a grain farmer. So his costs are certainly much lower, but he also sells poultry feed to people in the area at a much lower price than the feed store. So if you can ask around, maybe you can find, it's worth researching to find a lower cost source of feed and buying it in bulk, like by the ton versus 50-pound bags. Pasture birds have to be moved. Yes, you need the labor to do that. Whatever your setup is, whether they're free range like these within a pasture, these birds in the photos, or you're using the little portable houses like Joel Salatin uses. I think his are something like 10 by 12, and they house about 50 birds, and they get moved every single day. So it's good. It has its pluses and its minuses. One of the pluses to that is my next item, which is predator control. Birds obviously are a tasty morsel for a lot of different predators. You need to think about that in your location. Find out what kind of predators you're dealing with and think about how you can protect them. There's a big demand for and short supply of livestock guardian dogs that actually guard chickens and don't eat them. But when you find one, they're miraculous. You'll see this giant 130-pound dog lying in a yard in the middle of 100 chickens. That's a very definite possibility if you can find one. You'll likely need to do your own processing. In many areas there is no one who will process chickens or ducks or geese for you or turkeys. But it's not that difficult to learn. And Washington is a little further ahead than Idaho, in my opinion, on this. I understand you do have state-certified mobile processing facilities, which would be a wonderful thing. But I don't believe they generally come with labor. You'll need to do your own labor. Just plan on that. Another thing you can consider is, I know of many situations where folks have their own processing facility and they'll share it with you if you're willing to help them out. Well worth looking into. Next slide, please. Okay, the next species I'd like to talk about is goats, that are another wonderful small farm animal. Not a bad animal to start out with either.